Owen, for those of us who would really like to know whether there is a God, we know that there have been throughout history various arguments for the existence of God, but many philosophers would dismiss all those arguments as something that has been shown by different philosophers to be, or Darwin, to be just totally irrelevant and really have no worth whatsoever. As an astronomer and as someone who believes, how do you look upon the argument from design as being potentially helpful to see whether God exists?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I'm very impressed by the congeniality of the physical universe for the formation of intelligent life. There are so many things that seem to be almost on a knife edge, that they're just right. It's like the little bear's porridge. You just have to say, it's just right. So much so that it's really quite awesome. But I'm very ambivalent about this because I don't think you can make a proof argument out of design because there are too many ways of looking at it. Mm-hmm. I think if you approach the universe with eyes of faith, then all of these wonderful aspects do become evidence that there is something special, and this is a very logical way of understanding what is otherwise a deep mystery. Mm.
What are some of the examples of this congeniality to life that we see?
Well, I'm always impressed by the properties of the carbon atom. Mm-hmm. Carbon is the fourth most abundant element in the universe. It is an element that can bond with itself, and therefore you can get great chains, complicated rings, many, many more carbon compounds than all of the rest of the compounds put together. Well, because hydrogen always comes along with the carbon, you could say, all right, there may be more hydrogen compounds, but what makes the structure complicated is this ability of carbon to bond on itself. Well, carbon doesn't come out in the Big Bang. There are some barriers to get carbon to form because you get a lot of helium in the Big Bang, mm-hmm. and all you need to do is to put 3 helium nuclei together and you've got carbon. But you put 2 of them together and they don't stick, not easily, normally. And so if they fall apart, you have to start over again. You can do this inside of stars that are slowly evolving, very massive red giant stars, let's say, mm-hmm. Where you have enormous lengths of time. And then that kind of process can take place. But the Big Bang's over too quickly. You don't have that chance. Now, let's think about what happens in the stars. Fred Hoyle, who was a very powerful thinker with respect to nucleosynthesis, the formation of the heavier elements, mm-hmm. saw that there was a problem. This stickiness, one might say, was just not enough. There wasn't enough time in the universe to get up the great amount of carbon that we need for our organic structures. Mm. Unless there would be what we call a resonance level that would momentarily make that sticking work well enough that then the third helium could get in there and you could make the carbon. He predicted that there had to be a specific resonance level. He was out at Caltech. He went to Willie Fowler, who was working with the atom smashing machines, mm-hmm. and thought he had pretty well analyzed carbon. And this crazy guy from England, what's he talking about? But he decided to go and look. And lo and behold, the resonance level was right there, which makes it possible for the abundance of carbon. It is a wonderful example of what we can call fine-tuning. It won a Nobel Prize, by the way, for Willie Fowler.
Okay, and this is one of a number of fine-tuning kinds of arguments. But you said that although all of this fits together so nicely, you still cannot use it as a proof.
No, because I'm sure that someone who isn't impressed with this will not find this particularly persuasive, won't necessarily drive you to the existence of God. Fred Hoyle himself said, surely you must conclude that a super-calculating intellect was behind this, that there are no blind forces in nature worth talking about.
So what we're saying is that if you come with a predisposition to believe, then the data of the physical universe is very consistent with it. I think you can be comfortable saying that.
Very much so.
And somebody who does not come to it with a belief in God may have some other mechanisms. Can you even say which way of understanding seems better? Do you feel that coming to it with a predisposition to believe in God has a closer resonance with the apparent fine-tuning?
I just feel that this explains more than disbelief. Disbelief, I remarked to one of my atheist colleagues that he was also a man of faith, and he jumped and said, I don't believe in anything. And I said, but you have about as much logical grounds for your atheism as I do for my faith.
What was his reaction?
He was obliged to concede the point.
Well, in a sense, we all have to come with predisposed ideas to a set of data. Nobody is perfectly neutral. We all bring things to it. And the issue of design seems to be the one argument that it has even come back into a scientific discourse, as opposed to some other arguments for God, which are more philosophical, because of the richness of data from cosmology and astronomy.
There is so much data from cosmology that I think skeptics have had to think about this fairly hard and take it into account. So there are a variety of ways of working around this. For example,
what are some of the data that skeptics would have to deal with to work around?
Well, in addition to the resonance in the carbon atom, there are lots of others in terms of the physical constants, the ratio of the electrostatic charge to gravitational attraction, for example. And these are important in the way in which you can have planets forming. So there are many of these. I forget the numbers, maybe 40 of these constants, maybe 25. It's a number under 100, but sufficiently large that when you take all of them, it becomes rather impressive. And that's what I call the congeniality of our universe for ultimately the formation of intelligent life.
And each one of these constants are not necessarily related to one another. They're, some of them, quite independent.
At the moment, as far as we know, they're independent of each other.
Yeah. And so when you kind of aggregate it together and you take a step back, and it's hard to do, but perhaps try to put yourself in a neutral position in terms of a predisposed belief. How then, if you had no predisposed belief, would you then look at this array of apparent fine-tuning?
Well, I think it would certainly give you some pause, that some explanation is required. And I know skeptics can say, saying that God was a designing creator doesn't solve anything for you. It just moves it back one step. And I'm not sure how to address that, but it is part of an integrated system of beliefs that I have, and I think it hangs together. You see, otherwise, I'm forced into a position of saying, well, it's all chance. The universe is meaningless and purposeless. And that I find myself psychologically incapable of accepting.
So when you consider personally design arguments for God, how does it make you feel?
Well, I don't think they hit you like thunder and lightning. I think the universe speaks to you with a small, quiet voice. And I think Walt Whitman has it rather well in his Leaves of Grass. A child said, "What is the grass?" fetching it to me with full hands. How could I answer the child? I do not know what it is any more than he. I guess it is the handkerchief of the Lord, a scented gift and remembrancer designedly dropped, bearing the owner's name some way in the corners, that we may see and remark and say, whose?